So I guess I'll start with the first question, like what is shadow integration?
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, it's important to explain what the shadow actually is. And it's the place where all the thoughts and feelings and parts of your personality you wish you didn't have go when you push them away. So you have a thought you don't like, you have a feeling you don't like, you have a part of your personality you don't like, and naturally we just push that away. That's what we do. And only problem is that doesn't really go anywhere like most people think it does. They think it disappears when you push it away, but it actually just goes into this kind of like existential trash can known as the shadow. And the reason that's a problem is because all those little parts that you push back there are still alive. They're still doing things. They're still informing your opinions and perspectives and guiding your behavior. Only problem is they're doing it from a really freaked out perspective because they're the parts that were too scared or too in pain or too overwhelmed or whatever to deal with. So you push them away. So it's literally the least functional parts of your personality running your life from behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so what shadow integration is, it's taking a look at all those parts that you've thrown away, figuring out what they were trying to accomplish, and ultimately integrating them back into your psyche and into your life by helping them accomplish that same goal in a much healthier way.
Got it. So within shadow integration, and this is one of the things I think that we originally talked about when we first met, was I noticed the distinction with you with the term shadow integration versus shadow work. How do you kind of, I would say, like describe the differences or make the exception for that?
Yeah, so it's funny. This is actually, I think I came up with this distinction. I haven't heard it before, so if someone else said it before, I don't know. But,
yeah, I haven't seen it elsewhere either. So
okay, great, because I hear a lot of people talking about shadow work. You know, it's become popular within the last maybe 3.5 years or so.
Yeah, it's in the zeitgeist for sure.
Yeah, it's become really popular. But the only problem is that, like, there's honestly not that thorough of an understanding of it, because something that happens a lot of times is when something becomes popular, people will sell it even though they're not really good at it because they want to be relevant. They're like, yo, this thing that's really big and popular, like I do that too, even though they don't really fully understand it. And so there's a lot of miscommunication, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and people just don't really know better. So a lot of it's pretty innocent. And so I've looked at the way different people were talking about shadow work, and I was like, yeah, okay, that's not really shadow integration, but that is doing something. And then that kind of made me aware of the distinction. And for me, the distinction is shadow work is anything that allows you to become aware of your unconscious material. You know, like yoga can do that. Like you're in a pose and you start to become aware of your thoughts and feelings. Sitting meditation, you're breathing, you start to become aware of your unconscious or subconscious material. Talk therapy can even do it. Breath work, all these different things can help you become aware of what's in your shadow, but they don't lead to integration. Because integration takes all that a step further, and it adds an analytical component of not only being aware of your stuff, because it's good to be aware of your stuff, like that creates more internal freedom. It allows you to behave in new ways, even though your mind's telling you to do all this other stuff. And it is liberating and it is valuable. But integration goes just a little bit deeper and adds the analytical component and asks, okay, there's all these different thoughts in my head. There's all these different parts of myself. Let me ask why they're doing what they're doing. And let me see if I can find out a healthier way to do what they're doing. And the reason this is important is because when you get down to the very bottom and you find the reason that a part of you exists, and like, let's say an example from my life is I used to push people away because I was afraid of abandonment. And it sucked because I wanted to be close to people, but I kept pushing them away. I would either piss them off or I'd ghost them or I'd do something to make sure that they didn't want to hang out anymore. And I knew that that was because I was afraid of abandonment. And so I was like, okay, all right, part of me that's afraid of abandonment, like I don't want to be abandoned either. I'm actually on your side. I want to figure out a good way to not be abandoned or to be able to deal with it if I do. So let's deal with this. So I talked to that part of me and I was like, all right, how do we deal with this? First of all, it was like, even if we do get abandoned, I'm going to have your back. I'm going to love you no matter what. So you don't have to worry about a loss of love because that's never going to happen.
And just to interrupt real quick, that is that part of you in that moment. That's, I would say, Chris's objective consciousness, which is a whole, I would say rabbit hole or whatever, but like your awareness consciousness, right? That you're identifying self, talking with this abandonment part. So you're letting like the part that's afraid of being abandoned, let it know that you're going to love that, not sort of the abandoned part telling you you're going to be loved. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. It's me telling it, because a lot of times what happens is, because a lot of these things get formed when we're kids. And so we think if we get abandoned, like abandonment is from our parents. And so if we get abandoned from our parents, we think we're going to die. Usually, if you imagine rejection or abandonment and you try to think beyond it, there's usually just like a blank blackness there. And most people don't know how to think beyond that. And so when you talk to that part of yourself and it's like, hey, like I know back in the day, if we got abandoned, we might have died, but like you don't have to worry about that anymore. Because if we get abandoned, I'm an adult now and I can take care of whatever we need to take care of. And I'll also take a look at red flags and find the people that are likely to abandon me or that are likely to not treat me very well. And I won't invest in those people. I'll only invest in the people that I think will actually treat me well and not abandon me. But then if for whatever reason they do, I'll still have my back. And the reason that's different than just becoming aware of that is you could be in a relationship, and if all you're doing is shadow work, you're aware of your fear of rejection or abandonment, you're aware of your desire to push people away, and you just hold it while acting differently, which again is liberating and amazing and transformational. However, with shadow integration, you stop being afraid. There's nothing to hold anymore because the part of you that was afraid of it, you've met its emotional needs by letting it know that you're going to love it no matter what. And you've met its practical needs by being like, yeah, you're right. I don't want to get abandoned. So let me look out for the best people to invest in. And then when you do that, that part of you relaxes and it goes, oh shit, someone's taking care of me. Like the stuff I was worried about is actually being taken care of in a healthier way. So I don't have to worry anymore. And then that part of you just changes on a fundamental level and stops creating negative emotion for you to have to hold and be present with.
Right. So what I'm hearing from you is with that, you are essentially going to this part that's afraid of, being abandoned, and you are not simply even just meeting the needs in that moment with comfort or kind words, but it's also like you're going like, hey, what is the sort of practical application or action plan that I'm going to take to make sure that those needs are not just sort of emotionally taken care of right now, but are practically taken care of, right? You mentioned the aspect of basically like, hey, I'm going to look out for these particular traits in people who have abandoned me or don't treat me well. I'm going to actually move towards the people who show me that level of compassion, right? So you're not even just becoming aware with it and sort of acting on it, but from what I'm hearing is you're also like developing this like relationship with it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my guess is it's probably not simply right a thing of like, oh, I found this part and now I'm integrated. It is kind of like this ongoing relationship over time. Is that how it kind of works for you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I've been teaching it for about 10 years now. And the biggest distinction I see in people that like get a few breakthroughs and get some work done versus people that can completely take control of their lives is whether or not they really personify the parts of their mind and treat them like people. And the beginning of the relationship building aspect is interesting because most people will go into it with like, oh, this part of me has been so mean to me my whole life. It's sabotaged all my plans. It's fucked up my relationships. It's done so many things. It's caused me harm. They're mad at it without realizing that they're the ones that have actually been abusing it.
Yeah.
And that's why it's misbehaving.
Yeah.
So if you go into it with resentment, it's not going to work. You have to go in there with an apologetic heart and make amends to a part of you that you've been abusing.
Yeah. Yeah. This is resonating super, super hard for me because I did this type of work without realizing it was called shadow integration or knowing that particular name, where I have a friend friend and mentor who's a Zen priest. And we were hanging out in Shambhala, and he's like, hey, yeah, I would love to like mentor you. So we started working with stuff, and he led me through hypnosis and got in touch with my heart. My heart's name is Abigail. People ask me, is that the name you gave your heart? And I'm like, no, that's literally like her name. Like, it's this personified part. And we have a really great relationship, right? And then I was like, there's this other part of me though, who was like, sort of we got introduced to, who was like, didn't want to talk, didn't want to deal with anything. I was like, hey, we'll like leave it alone. And then when I was at Lost Lands this past year, I was sitting there and I kept like wanting to get more and more relationship with this part. So I would start to just kind of listen and connect and figure it out. And I realized that it was the part of me that, in my words at the time, was like scared, right? It was the part of me that was afraid to take risks. Whereas my heart is like, I want to jump into these crazy things and do this thing. And there was this other part. And I was, to your words, like abusive towards that part because I felt like that was the part that was slowing me down. That was the part that was preventing me from growing or keeping me from the things that I wanted. And in retrospect, I was like, oh, this is like the part that like keeps me alive. Like, this is the part that makes sure I have enough money for this thing. This is the part that allows me to like make sure I'm, not doing something completely asinine and get thrown in prison, or like, it's the part of me that wants to keep me safe. And like, how do I develop this relationship with this part so that not even just with me, but also like guiding that relationship between my heart and this other part of myself, so that I'm able to move forward much better. Because often what was happening for me was I would move forward, like you said, trying to push this part into the shadow and sort of go beyond what was a safe limit for me, and then have this sort of like nervous system retraction that was going completely against everything. And I would kind of have to start at ground zero, right? And it was this constant back and forth motion, versus as I've developed that relationship with my own boundaries and my own limits and needs and things of that nature, I'm able to move forward at a much more smooth pace.
Hell yeah, man. And that's so important to acknowledge, because that's one of the biggest kind of problems with not acknowledging the shadow, especially if you want to do spiritual practices like affirmations or mantras or anything like that. It'll actually put you in a conflict with the parts of you that don't believe it, right? So if you want to use an affirmation of like, everybody loves me, but deep down you believe nobody loves me, every single time you affirm that, the part of you that is invested in believing that nobody loves you is going to be like, no, that's not right. We can't believe that. You told me to never believe that. You told me to believe nobody loves me, because if I believe that, I'll be okay. And so it actually has to fight back to keep you safe. And then if what I did when I first learned like The Secret or whatever was I was trying to be positive, and then all my other like parts were like, hey, we don't believe that. That's not true. That's a dangerous thought. And it put me into this conflict that I already had anxiety, but it made my anxiety so much worse because I was constantly fighting myself. And it wasn't until I acknowledged the shadow and learned how to work with those parts and form the relationship that my anxiety went away. I could make sense of things. And I finally decided to, or I finally was able to develop a sense of inner peace.